Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Effective Resume Thursday. We're very glad you're with us today. It is February 16th, 2022. Please note this event is being recorded and is currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, you give consent for your name and picture to appear. Please note that any comments you put in the Zoom chat window will not appear in the recording. For those people who are on Zoom, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just put your comments and questions into the Zoom chat window. For those watching on Facebook, just enter your questions into the comment field. We're monitoring both feeds. We'll get those questions answered for you. Also, for those who are on Zoom, if you'd like to connect with everybody else who's on the call, please feel free to put in your contact information. Tell us who you are, what you want to do, couple target companies, put in your LinkedIn profile. Because remember, your resume and your LinkedIn profile will not get you a job. They get you a phone call. So, you want those contacts to try to help everybody else who's out there. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Morris. Back in 2008, I started a website called careerdfw.org. In 2012, I launched a second website, careerusa.org, to help those around the United States. I have written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search You May Not Know. It is available on Amazon. Since 2007, I've been facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. The group's been around since the late 1990s, and we have a really interesting presentation tomorrow morning at this group, and I'll tell you about it at the end of the session. And since 2017, I've been a member of the Practice Interview team. Remember, you want to practice your interviewing skills. Don't wait until you have an interview to come up. Practice now, practice early, practice often. More information, you can go to dallaspitcrew.com. Where our speaker today is Andi Cook. She's going to talk about communicating your story through your resume. She's a life coach, career coach. She's a resume expert. I love her last term on there that she's a crown straightener. So Andi, this is a pre-recorded session from a couple of years ago. But all the content still relates. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just put them in the chat window and we'll get them answered for you at the end of this session.
Thanks for the invite. It's been a little while since I was able to come and join you guys. So excited to be here. I was a career coach after a career in recruiting. So that kind of started out my job search career. And loved recruiting. I loved being able to match people with open jobs. But as I really got into the deep weeds of recruiting, I started noticing that there were a lot of people who were getting jobs or getting the interviews that weren't the best candidate for the job. They weren't the most qualified. And as I began to study what the difference was, the biggest thing that I noticed it was their resume. They had a better story in their resume. Their resume answered more questions. It opened the door for those conversations that other candidates were getting passed up for. And I really started paying attention to how do we write the resume? How do we tell the story? How do we really showcase how somebody solves problems for these clients so that they get the best opportunity and the client gets to hire the truly best candidate. When I got hit in a layoff in March of 2020, I started a career coaching business and resume writing business. I've been able to help more than 300 people find jobs. And back in August, I had the opportunity to join the staff of Life Church full-time as one of the pastors and made that plunge and have loved every single day of my job there. And so I don't always get to participate in the calls anymore because I'm out pastoring, but I still get to recruit people to help them find places to be involved. I get to coach and develop leaders and still all of the things that I love, but now I get to do it in a church setting. So I still, probably the coolest way I get to still work with people on their resume and job search is with our benevolence conversations. When people reach out to Life Church for financial assistance, not only am I helping them connect with resources, but when they tell me they're not working, I'm like, you came to the right place. Let's sit down and talk job. So it's not just a handout. We actually believe in helping people long-term and not just band-aiding a problem. So they think that they're coming for financial assistance, but they're getting resume help and interview coaching and all of the things, and end up with better jobs than what they got there. Today, I really want to focus on the story of your resume. And this is something I have seen a lot in the last probably 6 months. There's been this shift where we're so focused on ATS and getting a compliant resume that we forget to tell the story. And so I want to share with you a little bit. If we have time at the end, I will actually pull up my resume and show you guys how the resume looks in the end. But I'll share my screen here with you for a second. Jeff, can you see that thumbs up? Are you? I think you're muted, my friend. All right. I think we're good.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, perfect. So when we talk about communicating your story through the resume, Jeff made a good point. Your resume is not what gets you a job, but it is what starts a conversation. This should be just a first step, an introductory point into a recruiter or a hiring manager. It should lead to an interview. An interview should then lead to either another interview or an offer. There's this natural flow to a hiring process when a company is organized. And it starts with being able to effectively communicate your story. So whether you meet somebody at a networking event, some type of hiring event, through your resume, however that is, it all starts with being able to communicate, what do you offer this company? What do you do for them? And in a resume, it's not just this list of historical reference about you. This is your opportunity to really get in front of hiring managers and hang on, we're gonna fight. Okay. And really know that the best story wins. The best candidate can lose out on a great job because they don't have the best story, or, you know, a great resume tells that narrative of how you're the best person for the job, right? So you can look at that either way, but if you're the best candidate, and so often people will tell me, man, I was perfect for that job, but they didn't even get a call back. And it comes down to what I always call the yes, no, and maybe pile. Yes. So if I'm sorting through 300 applicants for this one position, I have 3 piles, those are going in. Yes, it means I'm going to call you back. No, you're going to get some type of rejection email. If you get a rejection email in the first 5 minutes after applying, that was automated. If it takes longer than 10 minutes to get a reply, somebody actually saw your application. So if you get a rejection, that's a no. But this black hole that people call, that's the maybe pile. And what it means is I have questions about you. I have questions about your experience. You might be a good fit, but I'm only going to reach out to you if all of my yeses don't work out. And so trying to get you out of that maybe pile, that kind of limbo between you might be a good fit, but your resume brought up questions that it didn't answer. Sometimes it's just changing your vantage point about what your resume is supposed to do. A great resume is a conversation starter. You're going to hear me say that over and over. I really want you to look at it as just a conversation starter that leads to an interview. It should tell your work history. It should answer more questions than it brings up. It should showcase how you solve problems and get measurable results. And I see a lot of times people will put measurable results, but they don't ever put the results that they measured. So it actually negates it. We need those numbers to support that. It should sound like a polished professional version of you. Sometimes if you're getting knocked out in the screening phase of an interview, it's because what you sounded like on paper did not match the voice that was on the other end of the phone. So if you hire someone to do your resume and they write it without you collaborating with them, a lot of times it can sound like the resume writer instead of it being ghost written and sounding like you. Nobody wants to be catfished. We want congruency in the person that I read, the person I'm talking to, and the person who shows up for work. That all needs to be one cohesive brand. So it should sound like a polished professional version of you. It should paint a clear image of what you bring to the table that is relevant to this company. I hear a lot of people say, they don't have time to tailor resumes. I'm going to challenge you that you don't have time not to. When I'm looking for a very specific person, a generic resume often won't speak to that skill. And so I want to make sure that when I'm tailoring a resume, if they say that they want somebody who has hands-on experience with mergers and acquisitions, I'm going to make sure that I showcase that I have that. If they say, or if I've read, let me go back on that merger and acquisition. If I've read that they have an upcoming merger and acquisition, I've seen it in the news, I've checked out the company, I'm going to make sure and speak to that. If they've recently bought out another company, I want to talk about times that I have supported those efforts. That's speaking specifically to how I can solve their problems and meet their needs. What your resume is not, it's not a historical representation of everything you've done in the history of forever. And this is probably what I go back and forth with the most while writing resumes, is getting people to let go of every single thing they've ever accomplished or done, because they want to include every bullet point. And really, when you step back, you will have a much more impactful, powerful resume if you will minimize the amount of information you're sharing, and you won't lose people in the details. Less can be more. You want to be very clear and specific, but you don't want to overwhelm people with information. It does not take the place of an interview. Remember how I said, you're going to hear me say this, it's a conversation starter. So there are things that you don't have to speak to on your resume that you can answer on an interview question. It also is not a job description. I see this a lot where people copy and paste a job description over. It should be what you did at a company, but it's really more results driven, not task driven. A job description are the tasks you're responsible for. What you're looking for are the results you achieved. So here's something I want you to think about. And I hear this all the time. If I could just get in front of the hiring manager for 10 seconds, I know they would see I'm the best person for the job. Your resume is your 10 seconds. This is your opportunity to get in front of the hiring manager and showcase them, or showcase for them why you are the best person for the job. ATS or no ATS, I've done a ton of research into the applicant tracking systems. I've looked at back-end code. It's something I understand really well. Here's what I want you to focus on. There's a lot of debate about what works for the applicant tracking systems and what doesn't. And your best bet is to keep it simple and stick with text-driven resumes that have a clear section header and they're easy to digest, right? Because once you get it through an applicant tracking system, you still have to impress a human who's going to review it. So there are more than 300 applicant tracking systems and thousands of proprietary applications. Trying to get a format that works for every single one is really hard. So stick with text-driven, simple, to the point resumes. I have whole trainings about applicant tracking systems. I don't want to focus on that too much today because I know there's a lot to talk about it. But I do want you to know there's 300 of them and they don't all work the same. Don't lose the story through the formatting. And this is something that I really do differently with resumes than a lot of people. So when we read, we go left to right. And remember back when your kids were little and you would help them follow along with their finger because they were training their eyes to move left to right while reading. But nobody taught us to do that when we're skimming information. So our brain goes back to that natural tendency to go top to bottom. So we go often down that left side of the page. Most people do this. So down the left side, and those become the most important words. That's why when I write a resume, I really align things on the left side of the page so we can move down very seamlessly. And things that draw your attention away, like these empty white spaces that are on the page, or symbols, or things that like break concentration, that becomes a stopping point in the resume. So where somebody's like, oh, I'll get back to it, and they don't. We want to keep their eyes moving until the story is done. So format in a way that keeps your eyes going from top to bottom, not left to right. Stick with the most important information down the left side. That means how you really start your bullet point is more important than how you finish it. It's all important, but you want the most engaging words on that left side. Start with your verb, not like people start in weird ways, but start with your verb. So I managed, I led, I spearheaded, I coordinated. Start with something that's going to engage and really tell your story. The words you pick are really how you're going to tell your story. Don't get distracted by empty white spaces. And I see this a lot, especially for people who have a marketing background. They want to use a lot of empty white space, but it can break concentration. Our eyes are going to naturally go to what is different. What do we see on the page that doesn't look like the rest? And if that's an empty white space, it's going to break that concentration. Avoid symbols because they are distracting. Again, our eyes are going to what's different, or they'll go to numbers and we want to avoid like the symbols that people use, meaning like the and sign. Go ahead and type out and, because again, it can be distracting. Instead of a dash on the data, actually write out the word to, so that eyes aren't going to that symbol. They're keeping it as cohesive information. And then end on the right side of the page. And what I mean by that is when you look at the resumes I write, I always try to move the finish line to the right side so it doesn't create that empty white space. Don't have orphaned or widowed words. It actually throws off that flow of top to bottom. So when you have like one or two words on the left side, it just creates that break in concentration. All right. When it comes to your opening remarks, well, let me first stop here and ask, does anybody have questions about that? I know that's a little bit different than what a lot of people teach. And so I just want to pause and see if there's any questions I can answer.
Well, the question I have, you say avoid symbols. One of the things I guess I've always heard is that you want to be sure to include numbers in your comments, because numbers stand out because it's not the normal A through Z. It's
Right.
something simple, something a little different. So by using a dollar sign or a percent sign, to me, that would sort of stand out and draw somebody's eye. So yeah. Are those okay? Or other
Great symbols? Question, Jeff. Great question. Those are actually perfect because you want somebody's attention to draw there. It's why I spell out the month instead of using numbers, so that when somebody sees a number like a percent sign or a dollar sign, it stands out because I'm talking about bottom line impact. So it's actually perfect to use numbers and symbols in that way because you want that to capture their attention, and it doesn't create, it means that when you see a number or a symbol, it's important, instead of it being like an and sign or a dash or something like that.
Okay, good.
Great question.
All right, and I have a list of, when you talked about start the comment out or start the bullet point out with the verb, I always say action verb, and I have a list, I think, of action verbs that I will put in the chat window, so people want to download the document. It'll give them something that they can be able to draw absolutely words with.
So good. And what I love about that is it's really great if you're not repeating verbs, especially in each section. So for each job, I try to not repeat the same verb twice. Great to use synonyms and really get creative. Make sure you select verbs that tell your story well. If you're trying to send the message that you're a leader, pick really strong leadership verbs. If you are trying to send the message that you're a team player, then make sure that you send collaborative type of language. One thing I will caution people on, if there's anybody here that's actually taking a step back from a leadership role, the language you use. So if you have been maybe an executive and you're trying to finish out your career at a different level, maybe taking a step back from responsibility, you want to kind of soften the amount of leadership language you're using and really use more collaborative language. So to kind of think about the words that you're choosing and how do they best represent your brand.
All right. I put those action verbs. It's in the comment field or in the chat window. Perfect. And for those people, if you cannot download it, I'll put an email address up at the end of the session where you can go and send me an email and I'll get it to you.
So good. So good. Thank you for doing that. When it comes to your opening remarks, so this could be a summary, it could be your executive summary. Don't label this part objective or summary, but these are the words that best describe you. Think about, what is your starting point? What is the one word? If you had to pick one professional word to describe yourself, what would it be? It could be something like engaged, dynamic, results driven, servant leader, dedicated, crown straightener, right? These become your brand. Probably wouldn't use crown straightener, but it does start a lot of conversations. But think of the word, that's going to be your opening line, the word that you want people to know about you. Get creative on that. Clearly state who you are. Clearly state your top, most important, most relevant skills. And then only talk about your degree in that opening section if it's relevant to the job, right? So if you have a criminal justice degree from 1974 and you've never been in criminal justice, it has nothing to do with how you work in the medical field, it's not important to list that at the top. You're going to put that down in the education section. But if your degree is relevant to this job that you're applying for, you went to a reputable school, those are the reasons why you would list that at the top. Another would be if you're applying for a job within your alumni network, talking about your degree would be a great place, like, especially if you're like A&M. A&M has the best alumni network in the world, regardless of how you feel about the school. Their alumni network is honestly the best. If you were applying for a job with an Aggie manager, you would want to mention that in your opening remarks, that you also were an alumni of A&M. Okay. So get creative. Think about, this is your chance to showcase what is most important and relevant. You're starting out your story, and if you don't engage from the beginning, you may lose them altogether. I do a section called Core Competencies and Achievements, and I'm going to show you this. It is at the top of the resume, and some people would always list core competencies as just this list of words, a strand of keywords. For me, those words are irrelevant. And I had hiring managers, some companies would actually make us take that off because it didn't tie to anything, and anybody can say they're an expert. But if it's not tied to something, or if it doesn't have supporting evidence, then it loses relevancy. So what I do is a section called Core Competencies and Achievements. So for every single one of those core competencies, I now add supporting evidence to say, here is why. This actually came from Kirsty Bonner. This was not something I created. But when I saw her do this, it just clicked with me. It was brilliant. But what I will tell people is, when they ask how many sentences to explain, you want your professional history to start on page 1. Okay. Because if you have just filler stuff on page 1, people will actually skip that and go straight to page 2. So you want to start your professional experience on page 1. So don't put so much information that it starts rolling on to the next page. But if you have 4 to 6, that would be a good number of core competencies. And then for each one, I usually put about 2 sentences, maybe 3, depending on how much experience I have with that. It should explain, why are you the expert on this? What have you accomplished? How have you been trained? What says that you're, like, for HR people, what's your experience with diversity and inclusion that makes you a DE&I expert? What is, for an executive, what have you done in your career that makes you ready to be an executive at the next company? What is your team leadership? How big was your team? Did you have direct or indirect reports? What was your annual budget? Those are kind of questions that you really need to speak to that puts you on level playing field. When it comes to your professional experience, tell the story of your work history. Again, it goes back to the narrative, the story. When you list the company and the title, make sure that you're really listing the things that you accomplished, not the tasks that you did. I never use words like responsible for, because I don't want to know what you were tasked with. I want to know what you accomplished and that you understand the impact on the organization. So I don't use tasked with, responsible for. I used accomplished, managed, the verbs, those action verbs that Jeff was talking about. Recruiters watch for gaps in employment. This is something from the very first recruiting job that I had that I was taught to watch for. It's actually one of the first things before we would even look at skills, we would look at employment history. So there is an HR method that says you don't have to have months. Almost all of the applicant tracking systems want you to have months, and will assign January if you don't put a month. But most recruiters also want you to have months, because if you say 2021 to 2022, that could be December 2021 to January 2022, which is not the same as January of 21 to December 22. So it could be 2 months or 2 years. And we really need that information. That's a big difference. If you've been at a job more than 10 years, you can get away with putting just years. But other than that, it's really better to include months. List what is relevant for where you're going. And this is where Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People comes in. Begin with the ends in mind. When you think about what job am I trying to get, you kind of back into what's most relevant on your resume. So if you're going into a sales leadership role, then we want to fill your resume with facts and figures and accomplishments about your sales experience. And so it doesn't matter that you filed papers in 1984. They don't care about that. They want to know, what are you doing right now that is relevant? What have you done in your past that is relevant to where you're going? So begin with the end in mind. And then for the professional experience, go back a solid 10 years for a traditional resume. And if you're an executive, it's totally acceptable to go back 20 years or as far back as you want to, or you have the space to go. Don't get too granular. Once you start getting past 10 years, people don't really look at that experience as super relevant, but you want to build a good solid history. One mistake people make is that they just don't put anything past their previous or their current work. So we list a section called previous work experience that just puts the information on the table so you can bring it up in an interview. I've heard it multiple times where people were interviewing and they're like, oh yeah, I did that back at, Johnson & Johnson. And they said, that's not even on your resume. This puts it on your resume, but there's not a date associated. You only list the company name and the position held. And again, it just puts that information on the table, tells your whole story. It makes it where your career doesn't start as the director of compliance and everybody knows you had to have a work history before that. And it kind of solves the mystery and answers a few questions. When it comes to education and training, make sure and list all degrees earned, any industry recognized courses you've taken, and then you can separate this between education and certifications and training if you prefer to, but there's not a right or wrong way to do that. One thing I will say is don't list every LinkedIn learning class that you've taken or Coursera. Only list the training that's really relevant and qualifies you for the job. I always recommend, if you have volunteer experience in the last 5 years, list it. Volunteer experience shows character. It shows alignment with common interests. It builds trust. Volunteer opportunities are not the place that most people who are out to harm society hang out. And so it kind of sends a message, we're both here for the greater good of humanity. And it can put us on level playing field and can stand out with and speak to your integrity as well. So it's always fun to include, especially if you have active or current volunteer or volunteerism. Don't forget to list any speaking engagements, publications, expert witnesses that you've done, studies and researches that you've participated in, as well as any memberships and affiliations. So those are all really good sections to include that people just forget about. If you have been an expert witness, this says that you've been recognized by a court of law as an expert in your field. You want to showcase that. Same thing with publications and speaking engagements. It says that people recognize your authority. That's a really great way to showcase exactly what you've done or your level of expertise. And then my last tip is actually coming off of your resume and moving into your social media. This is where it's really important that your social media support the evidence of what you know and care about. If you like make a claim to be an expert in something on your resume, I can take that or leave that. But when I go to your LinkedIn profile and now you're engaged in conversations about what is happening in the industry or technology tools or your thoughts or things like that, now that's supporting evidence. It actually makes you stand out as somebody with credibility, earns you tons of brownie points. So definitely be wise in how you're leveraging your social media. I would much rather someone use their social media platform on LinkedIn to talk about their career, their knowledge, their passions, their expertise than their political stance on things. So make sure that you're being wise on how you do that. I'm going to switch screens that I'm sharing, open the floor for education, and then I will pull up my resume and kind of go through what that actually looks like in writing, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to unmute your mic and ask away. Rosanna says, was the person named Christy Bonner? Was that the person you were talking about?
So Kirsty Bonner was a resume writer in the UK. She passed away a couple of years ago, but was the top resume writer in the world. Amazing, amazing teacher. But yes, Kirsty Bonner.
Okay.
Good. Make sure. All right. So guys, this is just a copy of my resume. It's, for me, it would be if I were applying for a talent acquisition executive role, and I really have this top section. So what do I want people to know? I'm strategic, I'm technology focused, something that stands out. So this goes back to what I said about opening remarks in that top paragraph. People ask me all the time about lines because there's controversy on whether you can use lines on your resume. I don't use actual lines. What I use is the shading tool. So it's actually just a highlight that you can take off or add here. I like blue because it gives it a little bit of color without it being over the top or anything like that. We'll just pick one. So that's me personally. I like to give it just a little color definition, make it professional. I use a Calibri font. Again, I want something that's easy to read. I use an 11-point font. When you notice that when looking over the resume top to bottom, I don't have a lot of empty white space, and I'm ending most of my paragraphs on that right side. And here's where I was talking about with numbers. So numbers are going to stand out because what I have with numbers and symbols, I actually want you to draw attention to. And this is what Jeff was talking about having measurable results. So when it comes to the core competency and achievement section, this is the part most people have the most questions about. So feel free to ask questions, but every one of them, I have some type of descriptive or catchy label on it: performance management, compensation and bonus structures, dedicated servant leader, customer-centric account management, employee retention. And the thought about this is, if you just glanced over my resume and only read the bold points, you would know my name, that I'm a talent acquisition executive, that I'm a dedicated servant leader, that I have expertise in performance management. Even if you only read the bold, you would still have a good idea about what I do, and it could be a conversation starter. Okay. This is where I say, don't just have words, have supporting evidence. Why can I say that I'm a dedicated servant leader? What have I done that actually made me able to state that claim? I think the hardest question I've ever had to answer, because I wasn't prepared at the moment, was, well, what makes you an expert in that? What qualifies you to say that? And I just, for whatever reason at the moment, was not prepared. And I was like, I need to better explain that on the front end, because I have the expertise. It was just being able to articulate it. really and truly, when you write your resume as a story, it actually sets you up to interview really well because you've already gathered your star stories. You've already gathered your accomplishments. If you know your resume backwards and forwards, you're ready to answer those interview questions in a more thoughtful way, usually. We have professional experience as the next section. On this one, didn't go back super far as an example resume, but I have bullet points for each one. I'm very specific. I managed a team of 30. I want to get really specific. And then I even, what did my team structure look like? That I had 2 managers reporting to me. I want to get really specific. And then on previous work experience, you can put dates, or if you really would prefer not to, you can just put the name of the company and the position that you held, especially if you're looking to not draw attention to much older experience. I always like to include a technical summary because sometimes people are looking for a specific tool. So in technical summary, I have it broken down by what does the tool do. And I always put something like this. I use Canva, and a lot of people want InDesign. So I can put in parentheses InDesign. That gives me that keyword. It also says that I understand how they're similar, but it's not stating I have experience with something that I don't. When it comes to my education, I don't have my degree finished. So I always put coursework towards. And then I list out my certifications and training, my volunteer experience, my memberships and affiliations, publications that I have, and then my speaking highlights. So those are ways that it just helps me stand out as an expert and says, I know what I'm doing. I'm active in the job search community. This could be beneficial for our organization.
Rosanna asks, is it better to place volunteer experience to cover up the gap in employment history or as a separate section? I mean, you have it as a separate section.
Yeah. So I think it depends on whether you were full-time volunteer and the level of volunteerism that you were doing with the company. So I've seen people who do like a volunteer full-time role while they're in transition. I would probably put that up in professional experience, but like when I go volunteer on build days at Habitat for Humanity, I wouldn't put that as a full-time role. So I think, is it just benefiting the community or is actually leveraging your career skills?
Right.
Yeah.
And I just want to make everybody sort of aware that there is no right or wrong way to do a resume. Okay.
Right.
This is Andi's preference. This is what she likes. This is what she's found effective for her.
Yeah.
You have to pick and choose what you like, what you don't like. I've always said a great fundraiser for Career DFW would be to get an MMA match ring and put Andi and Dirk Spencer and all the other resume experts in town in the ring, and it would be a knockdown drag out until they would come up with a resume that they all agree on. And they never will all agree on the same thing because everybody's going to go, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. Oh, you can do this, you can't do that. So just sort of know that, pick and choose the things you like, the things you don't like, and go, oh, that's a good idea. I should add that to my resume.
Absolutely.
Just sort of be aware that there's no right or wrong. It's whatever you feel comfortable with because you're promoting yourself.
Absolutely. I like to be data driven and science driven. I like to not bring a lot of my opinions in when I'm working with people because of that fact. There are some things that it's absolutely preference, and I'll tell you, hey, this is just how I like to do it. The core competencies and achievements, 100% my preference. I like it. I think it makes sense, but it's not something you have to do. And it's not something I would say stress about. But if I'm recommending something, I'll be able to tell you why. So don't hesitate to ask that question. So but great point. And I agree. There's not a right or wrong way.
So a question that I've heard, I've heard recruiters say is that they like to see the dates of employment right justified instead of being right up next to the title, whatever. I mean, what's your, you know?
So this for me goes back to the scientific way we read and aligning everything on that left side of the page.
Okay.
In fact, where I first saw it done in this way was the way Matrix Resources formats resumes. They put it on the left side. The first company I worked for, they put it on the right side. So I've seen it done both ways.
Okay. Once again, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Right. Absolutely. I think making sure it's visible and clear, that's to me one of the most important pieces. Same thing with whether your job title goes first or the company you worked for goes first. I've heard a lot of debate back and forth about which one of those.
Yeah, I think the company should go first. I agree with company, location, date, and then the next line, you also put down what your job title is.
Right. I also think, especially in this day and time, if you have worked remote, that's great to call out there. To actually list when you worked at a job remotely. So especially if a company is hybrid.
So if I was to look at your LinkedIn profile right now, how close would this be to your LinkedIn profile?
Pretty close. I don't have my Life Church experience on my resume because I haven't done anything with that since I started working there, but it's going to be really, really close.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is your core competencies and achievements like in your about section? Is that where you put that?
Yes. So usually for the about section, I take this whole top part and I copy and paste it over into the about section. And again, it's getting keywords in there. And the way the LinkedIn algorithms work, the more times you can use those keywords, the better. So it's not going to hurt to have those in. I also, in all fairness and honesty, have never met a single recruiter who actually takes the time to read about sections. So it's really getting you ranked higher in the searches, not necessarily because everybody's sitting out there reading it.
Right.
Okay. I think we spend so much time like crafting these really creative, catchy things. And honestly, the only person I could tell you that I remember reading in all of my years of recruiting was somebody who, it was a software developer who was tired of getting LinkedIn recruiters reaching out to him all the time. And people didn't read his profile. And at the bottom of his about section, it said, if you actually read this, send me a message with the word giraffe in the subject line. And I thought it was the most clever, funny thing. And so I definitely wanted to reach out. But I remembered that because it was something different.
Very, very good.
Yeah.
Let's see, Priya says, I have 4 jobs listed on my resume. The bulk of my relevant skills are in the jobs 3 and 4, listed chronologically on page 2. So I list relevant skills in the top summary of page 1. Any other tips that I can apply here?
No, and I think using something like a core competency section helps you move. So if you notice where I did these is not listed. So you actually can pull something from that job 3 or 4 and put it up in core competencies where it's one of the first things that people see and not have to tie that to, well, that was 10 years ago or that was 4 jobs ago. So it actually gets you a little bit more on level playing field. So not a bad idea to move that to the front page. Great question.
Good idea. Anybody else have any questions? All right, that is Andi's presentation. As just a reminder, it was pre-recorded, so that's why she wasn't able to answer your questions you had in your chat window. But I did have a couple of things here. Vicky says, does color on a resume affect the resume going through the ATS system? Here's the thing. I mean, as Andi said, there are over 300 ATS systems out there. It may not. The fact that you have your email address and your LinkedIn address as a hyperlink may or may not affect certain ATS systems. I guess the thing is, you know, and what is the ATS system doing? It's taking your resume and then it's parsing the information and putting it in different fields by default fields. Then you've got to go through and make sure that it put the right thing in the right field. I heard somebody who had a name of John Smith, MBA, the ATS system put MBA as his last name. So he was John Smith, first name, last name, MBA. So, you've got to take that resume, to what you're submitting on an ATS system, I think needs to be very clean, very plain, no special characters, no color, no underlining, because you want the information to get sucked in. You're going to verify that the information is all there. And then it usually says, would you like to attach a document? That's where you can attach your pretty resume, and you attach it, I would say, as a PDF file if they'll accept a PDF file, because a nice looking PDF file won't be changed, and you can put the color, you can have the spacing, and it won't mess anything up. Remember, when the ATS is sucking in your information, it's just trying to fill the fields to try to do that keyword search match. Let's see here. I've heard Terry Sullivan say the information on your resume should reflect our LinkedIn profile as close as possible. Would LinkedIn not have more information than a resume since each job? Yes, I would say definitely. Your LinkedIn profile, if you were to print it out, would probably be 4, 5, or 6 pages long. It could be even longer, because you probably would put more details about all that prior relevant work experience. You wouldn't just list the titles. You would go ahead and list, when you were there, what you did, and a few responsibilities. The whole key, you got to remember, LinkedIn is an ATS system. It's a matter of somebody trying to search for you, and they put in a few keywords. If you watch Kurt Vondermater's presentation about how he uses the LinkedIn recruiting package, he puts in a job title, he puts in a location, he puts in a few keywords, and then he sees what he gets. And if he sees it's too broad, if he has 3,000 people, he'll then put in something else to restrict it down, to get them down to a couple hundred candidates. So it's all about those keywords. Do you have the keywords in your about section? Do you have the keywords in your each of your jobs that you were doing? Do you have some of those keywords mixed in there? Ruth Lipsky says your keywords, another presenter on LinkedIn will say you need to have keywords in there 3 to 5 times to be found, for the ATS to find you. So, your resume, it's a keyword search. It's being searched. But just remember, when you fill out a resume and you fill in that job online application, you have a 1 to 2% chance of getting that phone call. You have a much better chance of, if you can network your way into the company and get somebody to hand deliver your resume to the hiring manager or to somebody in HR, then your chances of getting a phone call are much, much greater. Almost, I've heard, as high as 50% if you can get somebody to call, because people want to hire people who other people know. They much rather hire a referral than just somebody off the street that they have no idea how they're going to be. So that's it. Let's see here. Do we have any, look back, any other questions? Color, I thought I was another one here. Oh, Alexandra, you said, mentions instead of the dash sign, use words to, does this includes date? No, for dates, you're just going to put the month. The standard format that we would all see is year-year. So, that's no problem at all. You're able to do that. If anybody else has any questions, you're welcome to unmute your mic and ask away.
I actually have one more for you, Jeff.
Okay.
This morning, Gail Houston spoke during a Spark Talk after your South Lake focus group. And she said exactly what you said about the resumes, that you're going to get a better response when you have that personal referral and everything. However, what she did say is, because you're wanting to get in that window in the first few days of applying, when something first becomes available, she said to go ahead and apply to it and then network your way in. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. I'll tell you a quickie story. I saw a job. I mean, this is years ago, back when you had to look at a newspaper to find a job. And I saw the job, I applied online, and then I immediately went to LinkedIn to go, who do I know who works at that company? And the only reason I knew anything about the company was because it was in the email address, after the, at, it sort of said where it was, with the name. So I looked up the name of the company and I found that I had somebody who was in the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group, somebody who was a second-degree connection to somebody in the company. I contacted my contact, who I knew from my Friday group. They, that afternoon, emailed, said, oh yeah, I know the guy. So he contacted the guy. This guy lived in North Carolina. The guy in North Carolina that night emails me going, oh yeah, I'll be glad to help you. Send me your resume. He hand delivered it the next morning, and he sent me an email about 9 o'clock. I've just dropped off your resume. And at 9:30, 9:45, the hiring manager is calling me up and we're having a phone call. So yes, apply online, get it in early if you can. And remember, you should be doing that online stuff before 9 o'clock in the morning, after 6 o'clock at night, after 5 o'clock at night. Do those in the morning and the evening. But during the day, 9 to 5, be reaching out to contacts and network and who can I find in this company? Hey, Joe, do you know Mary? Can you connect me with Mary? I'd really be appreciated. So yes, apply as soon as you can, and then see how you can network your way in. And if you can get it in 2 or 3 ways, the more times your resume lands on somebody's desk going, you need to talk to this person. It's like, okay, well, this must be a sign. It keeps coming in 2 or 3 or 4 times. It would be beneficial.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions? All right, let me just share a few things and we will get out of here. I'll tell you about our upcoming program we have coming up tomorrow. If you want to reach out to Andi, you're welcome to do so. Here's what her LinkedIn profile looks like. I love her. She's a crown straightener. As she said, it's a great topic of conversation. So, if you think about something, if you have something on your LinkedIn profile or something you put on your resume, something that stands out, you're going to get this phone call. I remember somebody on their resume at the very, very bottom, they would put searching for the perfect hamburger. And the guy says, you will not believe the number of people would call me up, not to offer me a job or not to find out about what it, but they just want to talk about the perfect hamburger and where they found their hamburger at. So you never know what little phrase is going to get their attention. All right, if you'd like to get a sample resume, the sample resume that we use, the 1-page bio, a sample T cover letter, just send me or if you like to get the action verbs, if you were not able to download those, just send me an email at resume@careerdfw.org. Let me know what you're looking for. You're looking for the resume documents, and I will get all those to you in the next couple of days. Career DFW, Career USA, we're putting on training 4 days a week. As I mentioned, tomorrow morning, we have a really interesting presentation about crystal nose. This is, it'll be interesting tomorrow when we see this presentation, but a couple years ago, when I saw this just sort of blew me away. What it does is crystal nose is like an add-on to your Chrome. It's a Chrome extension that you add to your Microsoft or to Google Chrome. And what it does is when you call up a LinkedIn profile, it tells you what the person's like. It uses a DISC assessment test and it tells you how you should relate to that person. So we're going to look at that tomorrow. We'll get into some of the weeds, some of the details. It's really a fascinating presentation. You can do 10 free views a month. So I would highly recommend that if you want to have an idea when you're getting ready to talk to somebody and to know what are their hot buttons, what should you talk about, what shouldn't you talk about. It's a really interesting tool. This person who's going to Patty, who's going to present tomorrow, has been using this tool for a couple years now. Next Tuesday for LinkedIn Tuesdays, Ruth Lipsky will be with us to talk about how to drive recruiters to your LinkedIn profile. Next Wednesday, we're going to start the 13-part workshop. So we're going to do session number 1, preparing to be interviewed and how employment recruiting works. And then next Thursday being the networking session, we're going to talk all about, just one of our speakers will be talking about networking. This session has been recorded. It will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel. On the Career USA YouTube channel, be sure to click on playlist, and at the very, very bottom, find the topic that you want. There's 7 different playlists. And if you're looking for resumes, down below where it says view full playlist. Click there. Up will come a list of all the different recordings that we have. We've got over 420, 430 recordings up on the website now. So you're welcome to do it. This one will be up there. It'll take a couple hours for YouTube to get it uploaded. If you're not receiving emails about our workshops and you'd like to join the Career USA mailing list, just send an email to Career USA, the + subscribe at groups.io. You'll never be spammed, but what you will get is the topic of the day, the title of the day, and most importantly, the Zoom link of the day. That way you can open up your email, click on the Zoom link, and you'll be right there to watch our workshop. Please remember, Career DFW, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. All of our speakers are volunteers. I'm a volunteer. Everything I've done over the last 14 years has just been to help you land your next great opportunity. So thank you very much for joining us today, everybody, and hopefully we will see you in the morning. If not, we'll see you one day next week.